Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another week here on the Eye of the Storm podcast with myself, Ryan Droy, the voice of your Guelph Storm on Rogers TV. And we're very, very pleased to be joined by a great special guest. Storm Nation knows this guy very, very well. He was the first name to ever be put up in the rafters at the Sleeman Center. I look out at the banner from the booth every single night. The all-time franchise leader in points with 329. A long NHL career, and now one of our favorite broadcasters on TSN 1050 and TSN Hockey. Ladies and gentlemen, the O-Dog, Jeff O'Neill. Oh, how are you, man?
Ryan, good to be here with you. It's just hearing that. I was thinking about it the other day, like playing junior. I'm 2 years away from being 50 years old, and I got drafted at 16 years old, man. It's like I need to show up there and reintroduce myself to the fans to say I actually played here like so long ago. It goes by so fast. Like I remember it like yesterday, being dropped off in Guelph from my parents, and it's like you snap your fingers and you wake up and you're 50, man. That's pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, well, the fans are well acquainted with you. They remember you just fine. I see a lot of O'Neill jerseys still in the stands, I can tell you. And if you were ever to grace the arena sometime, people would be real fired up about it. I want to ask you about that time of your life. Obviously, you mentioned getting drafted to the OHL, and I know you're a King City boy. And take me back to that time of your life, coming out of minor hockey and knowing that you were going to be a big time fixture on an OHL franchise. What was that time of your life like for you and your family?
Um, I mean, for my family, I can't speak for them. It was probably somewhat easy just watching me go through the journey because they weren't the ones doing it. But for me, it's an important time of life, and it's a stressful time of life too. You're a teenager, you're 15, 16 years old. You got a lot of things going on at school, relationships, and you've also got this, like, I guess you could call it adult side of life. I think some other kids went home and did their homework and played with their brother and their sister in their backyard. And I put like a shirt and tie on and played junior B with grown men and had aspirations of being the first overall draft pick. So my life as a teenager was a lot different than others. And there was a level, like I said, once I stepped out of school and back to home, and in my parents' car, there was a level of seriousness where it's a lot for a young kid to take on. But I think my dad and my mom, they kind of prepped me for that, especially my dad, who was kind of in the inside, having two other brothers that played in the OHL. He knew what was going on and kind of prepped me for what was. And I mean, I was around it, so I knew what went into playing junior B hockey, midget hockey, the OHL. And you kind of just have it in the back of your mind what's going on there. I mean, my brother got drafted the year before me and played, and I was up close and personal watching the level of play. So I just look back on the whole experience where it was, and I'm glad I did it. You kind of, I think you grow up quicker. I mean, like I said, you're 15 and 16 years old, but there's also like an adult type of lifestyle that you're doing playing hockey where it was, I think it's just good for your growth.
Take me back to the early days in Guelph. What do you remember best about playing in the Royal City and being an OHL player? I mean, yes, the league is a little different now. Maybe the game, has changed and is a little faster, as people like to say, but you played in an era that was pretty rough and tumble. There were a lot of things that were let go back then that maybe don't get let go now. What do you remember about being a young player in the league and a player with a high profile too, that would have had a target on your back?
Well, I think the one thing separated from like level of play, toughness, like the Guelph Storm, and I think Mike Kelly set a standard and made it a mandate when he took over that organization. It was just like, we're going to bring good quality people into play here. And I think I'd like to think that that's carried on. You could speak more to that, but it just seems like if you were going to be a part of the Guelph Storm, there was going to be, and listen, not everybody's perfect. There's some bad apples in every group, but for the most part, like I think of the guys that I'm still friends with just through, like, just go down the line. If whether it was being a trade or drafting, it was just quality people. So that's the one thing I'll always be thankful for and appreciative of. And it was one of those things that it wasn't my kind of responsibility. You mentioned the era and how big and tough it was. we had people there that were going to stand up for each other, and they were always going to be tough. And it was kind of a team first mentality. So that's one thing I'll always appreciate, because that certainly wasn't that was not my specialty. But, being team tough, I think that just goes within saying the philosophy. If you get good people who care about the organization and their teammates, that's something that would just take care of itself.
You had some pretty good teammates that I know you're still close with today. Obviously, people think back to that era and immediately think of guys like Todd Harvey, Big Bert, obviously, Bertuzzi. What do you remember about kind of forming those relationships as young men, and many of you that went on to have very successful pro careers? What was that like, being part of a nucleus like that?
It was great. I mean, being friends with Bert and seeing him along the way. I know we had a few dinners along the way, and kind of met underneath the tunnel in some training rooms, whether it be in Vancouver or Hartford or wherever. And it was always just good to catch up. I think it's when you play junior with guys, you always kind of have that special bond. So it was always fun to see guys along the way, especially Big Bert. He'd always seem to be ticked off at something along the way. So it was always good catching up with him.
Yeah, and he'd let you know about it too,
Oh yeah.
especially on the ice.
It
You
was
know,
right
I
after, hi, how are you doing? And then he would say, oh, something's ticking me off. So that's just the
I'm
way
not
Bert was.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I think back to the night that your number went up into the rafters, and it was really, really special. I was there. I actually got to interview you after the game, or after the game took place, and I know your overdrive cohorts were there with you. It was a really fun night. A lot of special people out there for you, and I remember speaking to you, and you talked really glowingly about your time spent with Craig Hartsburg and
Yeah.
how he really brought a pro mentality to a junior bench. What sort of impact did he have on you that ended up leading to a lot of great success that you had in the NHL?
I can speak for Craig and John Lovell. I mean, that's the one thing about going to junior hockey. It's just there's like an NHL type vibe and attitude and mentality, because they know. Even John, who never coached in the NHL, he kind of knew what was expected at the next level. So, if it just helps you along the way when you're trying to get to a certain place, and you have people along the way that just kind of prep you for it, whether it be good and bad. Like, I'll be honest, both of my coaches, Craig and John, they were tough on me at certain times. It was not always a love fest where it was like, oh, great game, great shift. And I think that kind of preps you, the tough love, where you get to the big leagues and it's definitely not a love fest. You're expected to perform, you're expected to do things on a daily basis. So that was great, especially Craig coming in, who had just left the NHL and was looking to get back there. Just tempo and practice and work ethic and practice, and certain things that, you think are just kind of standard things, they're not acceptable. And I think I could just sum it up saying I had two great coaches there that really helped me mature, and just basically the expectations of what goes on a daily basis. I guess professional habits, you can call them. They helped with all of that. It really helped me for the next level.
That night that your number went up into the rafters, I'm sure it was very emotional for you and your family. What do you remember best about that experience, and what an honor it was to be the first guy in team history, deservedly so, to go up into those rafters?
I was really proud, Ryan. I got to be honest with you. I think not everybody gets to, I had a good NHL career. I played for a long time, but not everybody goes into the Hockey Hall of Fame and wins Stanley Cups. And for me, it was quite an honor just to play for an organization. And it's not easy when you get drafted first overall. I think there's a lot of expectations where you're looking to, that player is looking to turn things around, and you're looking to go the other way. And it doesn't always work out. I understand that now that I'm older and not playing anymore, where you see time and time again where it's like this expectations, and it's just anybody could be a bust and it not work out. So I'm just glad that I got there, and I helped the team have success, and kind of, the logo became more, it was just seemed like it was the years past. It was like, oh, Guelph Storm, they're a terrible team. So just to bring some honor back to that logo and make it a team that was recognized throughout the league, that's what I'm most proud of. But to see my jersey go up and Bert's go up, I'm really proud of that, of all the things that have happened in my hockey life.
Absolutely. And Ryan Callahan joined you recently, of
Yep.
course. And, the standard you guys ended up setting led to a real turnaround for the franchise. 4 OHL titles later, it's a model franchise. And, 329 points, that's going to be a tough one to pass as you're the all time franchise leader. And, before I touch on obviously a long pro career and what you're up to now, which everybody's familiar with, I think. I want to ask you about a really key moment on that junior journey, and that was representing your country at the World Juniors, where you're, the proud recipient of a gold medal, a loaded team with a lot of great talent. Take us back to that time representing your country and how much that meant to you.
It was great. I mean, I watched Jeff Bess, play in the World Juniors, and I was like, man, that just seems like such a big step. And I think I played the next year, so it was, and I was lucky because there was a lockout. A lot of guys came back from the NHL, and I went to Edmonton. I remember I had an injury, something was wrong with my foot or something, and I couldn't skate a couple of days. And I was basically informed by Don Hayes, like, look, if you sit out, you're kind of sitting on the sidelines, and it basically because it's going to cost you a spot on this team. So I tried to gut it out and play in one of the inter squad games, and I was lucky enough to make it. But to play with the best players in Canada, and I think what made it special was you can play in the World Juniors, but to play in one in Canada and win gold, it just seems like it's got that much more juice to it. So, to become buddies with all those guys, I mentioned seeing Bird along the way in the NHL. Every one of my World Junior teammates, we always said hello and have fond memories about that. There's just some really good time to play with the best of the best and not lose a game. It was pretty cool. It was one of the best experiences. Like I said, not everybody goes on to win Stanley Cups and have all these accolades, Olympic golds and stuff like that. So I'm also really proud of the World Juniors.
As you should be. And then, of course, first overall pick in the OHL, fifth overall to Hartford in the NHL draft. And you pretty much became a pro right away. You did not spend very long in the minors. You played a game. And then you went on to a very successful career, 496 points in 821 games. It's an incredible accomplishment, highlighted by a 41 goal season in Carolina. What do you remember best about first stepping into the NHL? And do you have that kind of quintessential welcome to the league moment that guys talk about?
I certainly did. It was my first shift in the league. It was against Mark Messier. And I was like, it was just one of those moments where I was like a hockey nerd. I always watched hockey. I knew all about everybody. And it was just like to face off with Mark Messier. And I remember winning the draw and getting a cross check kind of from behind after. And I was like, I'm in the NHL and I just beat Mark Messier on the face off. My parents were there. It was in Hartford. It's just, and the one thing you realize, it's, and it's another stepping stone where no matter how many points and no matter how good you are in junior, like when they say the NHL is the best league in the world, it's for a reason. It's just to excel at that league. It's just, it's that much more and it's that much better. But, to play 820 games in the league against all of the greats like Gretzky, Lemieux, Crosby, Ovechkin, all of them. I played against a lot of great players, and that's the one thing I'll be thankful for. Just to go through the time I did, to play against Wayne, who was my idol, Dougie Gilmore, who's my other idol, and now become friends with those guys. It was definitely the best time of my life.
And I want to touch on obviously you go to Hartford. The franchise unfortunately is forced to move. You end up in Carolina, and there were some hard days in the early days of that franchise. Of course, it's very different now, a Stanley Cup winning franchise. You guys came up just short when you were there. That turnaround that happened in Raleigh, what do you remember about that time? Because it was pretty significant.
Yeah, it was, and it was much needed. It was kind of a weird time for the fan base too. I don't know if necessarily anyone in Raleigh was clamoring to get hockey there. It was almost like the organization just said, we're moving to Raleigh, Durham. So you watch out, you better support us. And that was kind of a weird transition. Plus, we spent 2 years playing in Greensboro, which was an hour and a half away from Raleigh. And it was it was a scene. I'm not going to lie. It was like, how are we supposed to build a foundation in Raleigh when we're playing in Greensboro and there's nobody going in Greensboro, and they had to put a tarp up on the top deck so it wouldn't look like there was no fans there. It wasn't the NHL, I'll be honest with you. Like the spoiled side of the NHL is like filled buildings and rocking home barns, and it wasn't that. But as soon as we stepped into the new rink, it seemed to develop, and then just had some quality people there. We signed Ron Francis, and we brought in Gary Roberts, and we just had a lot of quality people there. So to turn that around down there and to give I think it was a big part of giving the fans a taste of what the Stanley Cup was. Ultimately, we didn't win it; they won it later in 2006. But that gave the fans the experience of going deep in the playoffs and what the experience was like, and it was big as far as like building the foundation down there.
And you're a big part of that. And obviously, you're still a very celebrated Caniac. And I know the fans down there still love their O-Dog stuff. And, you move on from there and you go to your childhood dream, and that's playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs, something I know that you are still and should be incredibly proud of. Your last season in the NHL playing for the Leafs, you scored 20 goals. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like you were over the hill or something. Take us through that experience as a guy from King City that grew up, your parents Leaf fans, your whole family Leaf fans, and you get to pull the blue and white on.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, man?
I got to be honest with you, Ryan. There's ups and downs to both of that. The reason I was so thankful that I got to play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the reasoning behind it goes back a little bit deeper. I lost my brother in a car accident, and that was ultimately the reason why I wanted to be traded to be close to home. So there was some give and take there where there were some real difficult times, but to actually put the jersey on was just, it was, it was a kid's dream. Like you're just watching the team every day on Saturday night in the basement and then getting to put the jersey on. I can remember sitting beside Steve Thomas in Hamilton, my first exhibition game, and it was just kind of surreal. It was like I'm sitting beside Stumpy Thomas, about to play the Boston Bruins in Hamilton, an exhibition game, mind you. But it was just a great experience to play with Matt Sundin and my World Junior buddy Darcy Tucker and Brian McCabe. Just a tremendous experience. There was ups and downs, but I'll never forget it, and it was really special.
I was going to ask you about some of your standout teammates there, and you mentioned a guy that your colleague Brian Hayes has kind of jackknifed him as your friend here. I know you guys
Yeah, I
often
know.
laugh about this, but Darcy Tucker, he was one of my favorite Leafs ever, and on the ice, as intense as it's ever been in the NHL. Like that dude was not big, but he was scary to play against. What do you remember about being teammates with that guy? Because he was entertaining.
He was, and he understood that, if you weren't going to be a 40 or 50 goal scorer, he was a good player. I think he scored 20 plus and 30 goals in the league, but he just brought it all. He's a farmer from out west, and it was just, he's a tough dude. And like I said, you look at him, especially you look at him without his equipment on. He's not the biggest guy, but he's got those long arms. And I think if anybody thought that they were going to go and grab Darcy Tucker and give him a beating, they were in for a rude awakening. You can go through some of the YouTube clips. Like he fought some tough. He didn't just fight any. He fought some tough guys and was not afraid of anybody. So it was great to team up with him and play with him for a couple of years.
I want to ask you as well. Obviously, I remember you best coming down the left side with that big right-handed shot, ripping Rister's top cheddar. You went up against some tough defensemen. We kind of touched on this earlier with the different era and some things that were allowed back then that probably aren't now. When you think back, give me a couple guys that you would go on the ice with and think, I got to make sure I know where that guy's at.
It's very easy. There's a couple scenarios. Dallas Stars with Darian Hatcher and that whole defense core was disgusting. There was Craig Ludwig back there. There was Richard Matvachuk, Darian Hatcher. It was just, you went in the corner against the Dallas Stars. There was some punishment. Or the worst ever was the New Jersey Devils when Ken Danico and Scott Stevens were on together. It was one of those things where you had to. You just had to be aware. It's like you couldn't play like a chicken, but you also had to make sure that. I always said to myself, you might as well dish it out to them because they're going to try to destroy you. So that was my approach with those guys. It's like you might as well hit or be hit. But Danico and Stevens, they were as tough as it got.
Yeah, Scott Stevens, for my money, maybe the scariest NHL player ever.
Pretty much.
He was a freak, and I
Yeah.
used to hear stories. I'm sure you've maybe come across my cousin, Brad Shaw, who's still coaching in the league, and Chris Drury, of course. Used to hear some horror stories about
Yeah.
old Stevie out there.
Yeah.
He was something else. I want to touch on, obviously, you move on from pro hockey, and you've now become one of the most recognizable media faces, dare I say media forces in this country. Overdrive is so insanely popular. For my money, it's the best radio show in the country, maybe in North America. And you're on the TSN hockey panel giving your thoughts every night, particularly on Leaf games. I've often heard your colleague Ray Ferraro talk about how he got involved in media, and he knew early on that it was something he might like doing. When did it occur to you that media might be something that you would like to pursue? Because you're damn good at it.
It honestly kind of just happened by accident. It was the lockout, and I got a call from TSN Radio, which at that time I didn't even know was a thing. And I made some stupid comment during the lockout, and they wanted to just speak to me on it. And I called them, and it was James Sobalski and Bob Makowitz who were doing the show. And then I went in for another kind of segment just to kind of chat. It was a lockout. I was done playing, and there was just nothing going on. So we just kind of chewed the fat a little bit. And then I did it, I think, once more. And then I remember on my way out the third time, um, the third time I pulled the guy aside and I said, "Hey, I don't mind doing this. Like, I like doing this. It's kind of seems like a good gig." And I kind of had some opportunities that I said, I'm not sure about that, but I went back and started a regular gig and I never left. So it was, it was kind of a weird start. I never really wanted it or thought about it, but I'm happy I did. It's been a great career.
Well, you have such a big personality, and like it lends itself really well to media. And like I said, so many people are familiar with the Leafs lunch days, into Overdrive now, which has been going a long time. Your work on the panel. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your two co-hosts, because you, Hayes, and Noodles, Jamie McLennan, of course, you guys have a really unique dynamic. It's so fun to listen to. What's it been like working with those guys, and what makes the three of you together so special?
Um, I think it's one of those things where it's not like you're forced to like each other, but it's almost like we're blessed to just be kind of old school sports guys where we enjoy each other's company, and it's pretty easy friendship. Because there's some people that probably have those kind of gigs where they're not exactly on best terms with everybody, but I think it just helps so much with chemistry to be good friends and have a lot in common, and think about things somewhat similarly. We don't always agree, but that probably makes it better for kind of viewership. But they're just great guys, and I think it all starts with Brian, because I think he's the best kind of host at that there is. He's just as good as it gets. So to work with two good guys like that, I'm sure doing any job, it's like when you get to work with good people, it makes it that much easier. So I'm very lucky that way.
Yeah, I mean, for my money, I've said it to many people. Hayes is the best sports host going right now. He's fantastic, and you and Noodles have such a unique chemistry too, having played. And I always enjoy it when you have guests on and they go, "Well, Dog and Jamie, you know what the NHL is like." That's always a
Yeah.
fun little inside joke for you guys. I want to ask you a little bit as well about the Leafs right now. Obviously, you're still very passionate about the team. You should be. You're an alumnus. And you guys spend, of course, a lot of time talking about this team. And unfortunately, over the last 8 years, it's been a bit negative just because of the shortcomings in the playoffs. In your opinion, what is going wrong for this core four, whatever you want to call it? What is it that's going wrong here that they can't seem to get over that hump to have success?
Very simple, Ryan. I mean, I'll give you the short answer because there only is one. They haven't found a way, and they haven't figured out what's important in the playoffs. And I don't know if it's roster construction, but the same guys do the same things in the playoffs, and it's not good enough. The goaltending doesn't seem to be good enough in the playoffs, and their star players can't seem to find the right mojo to perform at the highest level. And the team's been mostly built on skill the last 5, 6, 7 years. and that just doesn't get it done. You got to get the right combination, and until they do that, they'll continue to do what they do. It's pretty simple answer.
You recently went on a bit of a tirade about the whole Mitch Marner thing, and he's been an interesting talking point in Leafland. But people have made a lot of bones over the years about Toronto's a hard market to play in. The media is too hard on these guys, and you and Hayes in particular have been vocal advocates of shooting that notion down. I agree. I think that Toronto is one of the best markets in the world. What about playing in Toronto? Because you experienced it, and you experienced it at a much tougher time than these guys are going through. What is so special about Leaf Nation? Because that fan base, man, have they been through some pain.
Well, they have been, but it's one thing. Like, you can get the money, you can get the contract, you can get all the attention, and whenever they play good, all I do is talk good about them, all of them. So it's one of those things where if you want the money and you want the contract and you want to be the big superstar and you literally don't win in the first round every year, I don't know what you expect to come your way. And it's not like we're personally attacking anyone. The job as an analyst to describe what happens on the ice, and I do the same thing every year where it's like they weren't good enough, that guy wasn't good enough, all the way down. It's not personal with anyone. It's not picking out anyone, but it is the same thing every year. So as far as the players go, I'm not sure what they're expecting, but that's just pretty basic analysis. That's what happened. And it's the same. It feels like Groundhog Day every time on SportsCenter. I'm like, well, these guys weren't good enough and they can't defend and they can't keep it out of their net. So it's the same show every time. It's kind of frustrating. So I'm not sure what the players are expecting, but that's what happens in a big market.
Well, I'm hoping it turns for you for sure. And we really appreciate your time. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I do want to ask you, though, like I said, and I'm sure you can tell, I'm a very avid Overdrive fan. I don't think I've missed an episode over the last 7 years. There have been a few moments over the life of the show that have stuck out to me in terms of you guys breaking down in laughter. There have been a couple. I talked to Hayes. He was a guest on an old show of mine with Chris Clark, and I want to bring up 3 that stick out to me. One is, and I discussed this with Brian, was the Pierre LeBrun chair incident. The muchacho when you had your surgery and they brought you into La Bamba, and the constipator. Which of those 3 do you think you laughed the hardest at?
I think the muchacho, because honestly, like, I just had shoulder surgery and I had to find something, and it was my wife's like shawl type thing, and I had to wrap it around my neck, and I had no other choice unless you literally want to put a shoulder brace just after surgery with blood coming. Like, it's just, I had no choice, and those guys put eyes on that, and they put eyes on it before because we had to film like some kind of commercial or something. So they knew it was coming, and they still saw it for the second time, and they couldn't control themselves. But, we had a couple of years there. We had no sports. We had to do shows without hockey, but anything, no sports shows, 3-hour sports show with no hockey and no sports. So it was, to get through those, you have to have some laughs once in a while. They were all fun.
Yeah, and you certainly did. That one sticks out for sure. It was pretty darn funny. I'll have to get Brian on and play confirm or deny that he set up that La Bamba playing.
For sure.
I'm sure he'll deny it. Jeff, you're still so beloved in Storm Nation, as you should be. #1 player in terms of points, first guy to have his number retired. We can't thank you enough for being on Eye of the Storm, man. We look forward to having you in Guelph sometime soon. Thanks so much for doing this, buddy.
Ryan, thanks very much for having me. We'll talk soon, man.
Absolutely. Remember, everybody, you can find this podcast on the Guelph Storm website and all your favorite podcast apps. And if you want to come down, maybe the O-Dog will be in the building. You never know. You want to come down and see the Storm play this year, visit the Sleeman Center box office or the Guelph Storm website. We'll be back next week with more.